Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Fly With Us podcast. This podcast is bringing the art of conversation, self love, self care, mental health care and protection, life lessons, and everything in between. I'm Lady Bounce.
And I'm Picket Fence.
Welcome to the show, Sir Pickett.
What's happening?
So, you got our mindfulness minute for this episode?
Yes. Today's Mindfulness Minute is about Black history. The story of Black History Month begins in 1915, half a century after the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery in the United States. That September, the Harvard-trained historian Carter G. Woodson and prominent minister Jesse E. Moreland found the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, an organization dedicated to the research and promoting achievements of Black Americans and other people of African descent. Now today as the Association known today as the Association for Study of African American Life and History. The group sponsored a National Negro History Week in 1926, choosing the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. The event inspired schools, communities nationwide to organize locals, celebrations, establish the history clubs, and host the performances and lectures. In decades that followed, mayors of cities across the country began to issuing yearly proclamations and recognitions of Negro History Week. By the late 1960s, thanks in part to the Civil Rights Movement and the growing awareness of Black identity, History Week had evolved into Black History Month on many college campuses. So the Mindfulness Minute is a brief history of how Black History Week became Black History Month.
Okay. And so, to piggyback off of what you said, as you know, every president that comes up with a theme for Black History Month. So this year we have a new president installed. And can you tell us what his theme is for this year?
So this year's theme for Black History Month 2021 is Black Family, Representation, Identity, and Diversity, exploring the African diaspora and the spread of Black families across the United States.
Wow. So it kind of sounds like an exploring your roots kind of thing, like the show that Henry Louis Gates does on PBS, Finding Your Roots. Yeah. I like that. So that's the theme for this year, is to find out who you are and where you come from as much as you can.
As much as you can.
So how do I start that? Like, I don't know. I woke up today and I'm Black. What's the first thing I should do?
Well, you mentioned the Finding Your Roots show. I believe they use Ancestry.com as one of the tools that they use on that show. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. That's where you take a DNA swab of your cheek and they check your DNA and link you to possible relatives. So that's one tool. They also use what they call that thing that they go around every couple of years, census.
The Census Bureau.
Yeah, they use the census records also. And of course, they ask you as much history as you do know about your family. And but I think that one of the problems that we have in our community is most people don't know their history when it comes to the African American community. They probably could go great grandmother. I think it's becoming different now because we have a lot younger mothers. Great grandma might only be 47. Great grandma might be 47. I mean, in my time growing up, my grandmother was elderly already when I was growing up, and I never met my great grandparents. They were already gone before I came into the world. So in our age bracket, you might know your great grandparents, but I don't know too many people to know great grandparents that are like my age. So it becomes kind of hard. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems we have in the African American community, because there's an old saying, uh, how does it go? You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us don't know where we came from.
Right. Well, we have stories, and then it seems like we have these great stories, we have these great histories, and then all of a sudden it skips a generation, and one generation is completely left out of knowing the story or knowing the history. Like it skipped a generation, it didn't get passed, and then you have our generation coming in and trying to piece together the pieces with the limited knowledge that we've been given or been shared. So as you were talking, I was thinking about in my lineage how far back I could go. I could go as far back as my great grandparents. So I know my grandparents, of course, and I know my grandmother's mother and father, and I know my grandfather's mother and father, but that's where it stops at. I don't know anything past that, just because I don't know, my family probably just got caught up in living, and raising their kids, that they forgot to pass down that piece of the story. But now
Right.
my mother and my aunts and my uncles, they can go back a little further than I can, because they grew up, with my grandmother and with my great grandmother, and so they were able to hear stories from my great grandmother. So in order for me to piece it together, I'd have to sit down with each of the 6 of them to find out, what stories they've been told, and try to put it all together.
Right. Come a little forward. You kind of got away from the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it kind of went low. I could still hear you, but it was real low.
No.
But yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, it's sad, but I mean, I know what my great grandparents look like, but I don't know their names really. Not that it's in memory to me. I mean, I know at some point in time I did know their names, because I've got pictures of them myself, even though I never met them. But because we don't continuously talk about them, I don't know their name. My grandfathers on my mother's side, I don't know. Now, I do not know his parents at all. I never met them, never had pictures of them around. But my grandmother on my mother's side, I have pictures of my great grandparents. And I think everybody in our family has the same picture of our great grandparents, but not saying their name all the time. I couldn't tell you their name. I know their last name is Dent, because I know I come from the Dent family. But other than that, I could not tell you. And I mean, now I do know stories like he was from down south and he got into some trouble, so he had to come up north, but other than that, I don't know a lot about that. And you once again, you were talking about finding our roots, and we were watching that the other day, and Michael K. Williams, when he was on there, and he just looked, and he said it several times, how empowered he felt by knowing his family story, finding out his family story, knowing that his family pretty much had been in the same area since they were brought to the Americas. From the time that his family was brought from Africa to the Americas, they were pretty much in the same area. So he could track his family history down real far back into slavery. And in doing that, he found out what happened to them after slavery, that they were able to buy and acquire land, and that his great grandfather was the first Black person to vote in that area after slavery was abolished. And he just, he talked about how powerful it made him feel just knowing his family's legacy. And I think that we all could be empowered finding out, pieces of our past.
I definitely agree with that. And when I look at what I do for a living, to watch that episode, with Michael K. Williams, and to see how he felt, and he just basically came alive finding those things out. So I often wonder if like the students that I work with, if they really truly knew where they came from, would they be different? Would they live their lives with more purpose? And not just the students that I work with, but, you know, African Americans as a whole. If we really truly knew, you know, our individual history, and not just, oh, we were slaves, they picked us up from Africa, you know, and that's where our story begins. But that's not where our story begins, you know.
Right.
In the history books, that's what they tell us, because it's, you know, it's part of the programming, you know, that we've been indoctrinated with all of these years. So definitely, you know, wonder how things would be if we really knew our stories, if we really knew our history. How would that impact the way that we live now? How would that impact the way that we live our lives, which would, of course, impact the way that people see us? It would totally impact the Black Lives Matter movement and really make it more concrete and more whole to everybody, and not just a certain sector of people. If we really, you know, like I often hear it said, you know, Black lives have to matter to Black people. So I wonder if we knew our history and we had that shared history and that collective sense of responsibility that we are here for a higher purpose, and we came for, you know, a higher purpose other than just being an enslaved people. Just how impactful, how amazing would that be to live in a society where we saw each other as equals and not as competition, or not as a means to get over or easy mark, if you will, you know, just to live and to be. Like, would we be able to, you know, not have, you know, things called driving while Black or walking while Black? Would that even be a thing if we lived our lives with more purpose, knowing where we came from and who we were before they told us who we were?
Oh, I think that it would definitely help. I don't know if it would solve all our problems, but I definitely think it would help. I think about, when you think about dynasty families, I mean, dynasty families, you know the names, Rockefellers and so on and so forth, Kennedys. These people are real big on their family heritage. They're real big on the strength of their name, and they're real big on holding their family and legacy to the highest standard. And I think one of our many problems and issues is that we don't know our past. So we don't have something to stand on. You know, like, you know, all of our greats stand on the shoulders of previous greats.
Right.
And like you said, with the programming, they strictly tell us like they weren't Black people until slavery. That's the way the education system makes it seem, is that Black people were invented during slavery. So we don't have legacy, or we don't edify our legacy. And I think that's one thing that could help us. You know, people always talk about reparations of slavery. There's no way in the world they're going to give reparations of a good, whatever figure money you come up with. They're not going to give us 40 acres. Even though there's probably enough room to give everybody 40, they're not going to do that. But one thing that they could do to help people is two things. I think that every African American should be able to go to college or trade school. Let's never forget about trade school, for free. Two, I think that every African American should be able to get a genealogy test for free.
Wow.
That's a start, because they're not going to give you $1 million.
Right.
You know, then we can go from there. Because one thing, if you have a starting point of where you come from, you have something that can empower you. If you have an education, you can be empowered.
I agree. Definitely. And definitely love what you said about trade schools, because so often we impress upon our youth, oh, you gotta go to college, you gotta go to college. And that is such a myth. You don't have to go to college to get a good career. You don't have to go to college to do something that is going to make you happy and fulfilled, or even to make you a lot of money. We perpetuate this myth almost as like we want to keep our nation in debt. We don't want our nation, to get ahead. We don't want the people in our nation to get ahead, except for that 2% that everybody always talks about. But for the common person, you're going to take an impoverished child and then tell him the only way you can make it is to go to college. And then he's going to go to college and come out with a bunch of debt and still can't get a job. Wow. Whereas if you sent him to trade school, my plumber makes more money than I make. And chances are that plumber had to go to school to learn how to be a plumber. But as a teacher, I'm going to make less money than what he's going to make going out in the field fixing toilets.
And not to mention the cost, the cost that whatever you make coming out of college, is it enough to pay off your debt? And how long will it take you to pay off that debt, depending on how much money you needed?
Exactly. I've got 2 college degrees and 2 sets of student loans that are now 1 set of student loans. And at the rate that I'm going of paying it back versus the money that I actually pull in, my great grandchildren are probably going to be paying off my student loan if something doesn't happen with, our president and vice president coming up with a new plan, or if I win the Mega Millions. And since I'm a sore loser and I don't play, the likelihood of winning to pay off my college debt is slim to none.
Yeah. It's a terrible setup, the system that we're in. And, not to get too far off topic, but I think that we need to help people find out who they are and cultivate communities that help people thrive to be more. And I think that finding your past is one thing, and education is another. And even if you cannot, go to school, I think that the library is still free. I know the library is still free. And we should somehow in our community make education cool. Make it cool to be smart. Because if you have someone that's computer savvy in your family, they could help you with finding your roots, finding your past. If you're a person that journals, go to Big Mama, go to Aunt Tutu, Uncle Rollo, and write those stories down. Write those stories down. Go to Big Mama and write those recipes down. That good cooking that now you eat McDonald's and Burger King every day.
No, Big Mama not sharing her recipes. No, sir.
Yeah, Big Mama would share her recipes. Nobody is asking Big Mama those recipes. Nobody's asking Big Mama, why do your greens taste different from Glory greens in a can? Nobody's asking Big Mama, why is your fried chicken fall off the bone and taste so delectable? Could you show me that? No. What Ra want to do is drop her kids off to Big Mama and hit the club. She's not concerned with apple pie. She's concerned with apple crown royal.
That's the best. Well, I can say from experience that I did ask my grandma to teach me how to make her greens. And, God bless the dead. And she taught me, but when I make mine, they still don't taste like hers. So I'm still missing something. And I do everything that she told me to do, from the way I clean them, the way I heat the water ahead of time, the way we pick them, and the way you cut them. And no matter what I do, They still don't taste exactly like hers. They taste close enough, but it just, I don't know, something's missing. She forgot to tell me something. Either that or I don't have grandma's hands.
Or maybe what we need, or maybe the thing is, we talking about practice. Maybe that's what we got to talk about is practice. Because how long did grandma make greens? She didn't make greens 3-4 times.
Her whole life.
So you talking about how many years of making those greens before she went to teach you?
Oh, she
Decades.
Probably had a good 70 years of making them, yeah.
Decades. So we might be talking about practice. But you have the recipe. You went and asked.
Yes, I did ask.
And I mean, you might not have wrote it down, but you have the recipe. You know what I mean? And I think that I think that's something we need to get back to doing is going and asking for those stories, those recipes, as much about your culture that they may know. Because even grandma and great grandma don't know a lot about our culture. They knew about, they were fighting to live, especially if you have grandparents that are way up there now. In their time of growing up, they were just concerned with trying to live, which created a culture of its own. So we can't forget about that either. So we need that culture that was created in this country, as well as trying to find the culture we had before we came to this country, or as far back as we can. And I think that would empower us. I wish I knew how to make my mom's Texas fudge cake. I say it all the time. I have no idea. I know my sister has the recipe, and we might be talking about practice. It's not the same. And I think, but one thing that it is, I believe in ancestors being with us at all times. And one thing that I have noticed with like my nephew Joe, my great niece Jada, is how they have absorbed her essence, and they are all into baking. That's not something I picked up for her because her baking kind of irritated me because it was messy. But so those are things that you don't even know where they come from, but they hit you. You know what I'm saying? Like my great niece, she never met my mother. She never met her. But I think that her essence is because your DNA is passed down, just like trauma is passed down through DNA. So are the joys of life are passed down through your DNA. And I think that we need to take more time to study our DNA, within your own family and within our culture collectively, our community collectively.
So you mentioned some ways to do it. Of course, there's Ancestry.com and there's genealogy test. Do you have any other free resources? If I can't afford a genealogy kit, or if I don't know where to begin because I just don't have that discretionary income, how can I go about finding these things out? Besides, going to talk to Big Mama is a good start.
Yeah,
what else can I do?
I think that's the first step you should do, is talk to Big Mama, because even if she doesn't have a lot of the history, she might be able to point you in the right history. Like far as Big Mama's mama was born in Mississippi around this time. Therefore, you might be able to, it's going to cost a little money to go to Mississippi if you're not already there, but you might be able to go check birth and death records there. Or if your family's been in the same city for a long time, like I know your family's been in this city for a few generations, you can go check birth and death certificates. So that's one step that you can do. I don't know how you get a hold of census records. I mean, I know they do that on a show, but you can. But the first step, I think, is talking to Big Mama. If you're fortunate enough to still have a Big Mama. If you don't, go to Uncle Rollo. Go to Aunt Jackie. Talk to the oldest members of your family who are still existing to try to get some information. If not solid, concrete information, at least a trail that you can be put on. You know, find out where their parents were born at. Find out the different cities that they lived in. Find out the different jobs that they had. And those are like little pieces of trail that you can start to collect information from. You know, and you know, people use Facebooks for all types of crazy things. Facebook could be used to contact family that you never met. I found so much family that I still haven't met to this day, but I talk to them all the time now. Like I've met them and known them forever. Because you know, growing up, my dad wasn't in my life. We got cool as I became an adult. You know, always knew who he was. I just never saw him. So you know, I met my sisters. That he has They had two other kids, and now I'm meeting my cousins and you know, and first, second, third cousins on Facebook. Some that even lived in my same state for the longest and had no idea who they were. I mean, they don't no longer live here now, but you know, so try to reach out to people that way so you can check on. You know, it's kind of hard looking for just last names. Military records. As you know, you and my sister found my dad after many years of us not even talking to each other through his military records. So, you know, you could ask Big Mama, hey, how many people were in the military? What were their names? You know, and you can look those military records up, see if they're not still alive. Maybe they have kids and grandkids that are still alive, and just start connecting the dots. My sister uses Ancestry.com. And the cool thing about a website like that, they have different packages, different prices. Some of them are free if you're just going on there just looking, but they're like, you pay for different stuff you want to do. But the thing that is dope about it is, as you start linking people up together, they automatically start collapsing the different family trees together. And you could get a spreadsheet to say the least, you know, in a word, a spreadsheet of your family. So, I mean, some resources, the cheaper resources are going to be more difficult, but that's a place to start.
I like it. And I know the libraries are kind of open and kind of not open because of COVID, but you can go in the basement of the library and look at the microfilms from many years back. They have a huge vault in the main library downtown that has everything in it. So the same places that you named, they have some of those archived at the library as well. So you can talk to Big Mama, you can hit the websites, buy the, you know, Ancestry kits or whatever from the store and mail order, but your library can be a big source of information as well. And it can even help you after you've gotten some information to help fill in some of those gaps that you may not, you know, have been able to have. So I definitely would add that to my list of resources of places to check out to get, you know, get a sense of who you are, to get your history as much as you can. And you may be surprised at how much stuff is really out there. You know, now that technology has become so advanced, it really is at your fingertips. You know, really.
Word up.
So our self-care assignment for this week is to go do your research and discover who you are.
Yeah, make a family tree.
Make a family tree.
Get some poster board, cardboard, or do it online. Or, you know, you could do it on your own computer, pull up a graph sheet and just start putting in those names. And when you do that family tree, make sure you do it that's printable or something that is visual so that your kids have something to look at growing up, being able to know as much as possible about where they came from.
I like it.
Word up. So you know what time it is. Boom, 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 brain science. All
right. So this week's brain science is going to talk about how culture wires our brain. Cultural values may leave a greater impact on our brain more than our behaviors. So, culture has been called an amalgam of values, meanings, conventions, and artifacts that constitute our daily social realities. As a system of meaning and shared beliefs, culture provides a framework for our behavioral and affective norms. Countless studies in cultural psychology have examined the effect of culture on all aspects of our behavior, cognition, and emotion, delineating both differences and similarities across populations. Most recently, findings in cultural neuroscience have outlined possible ways that the cultural scripts that we learned during childhood and the cultural practices we observe as adults influence our brains. So, what is this cultural neuroscience I'm talking about? It is an interdisciplinary field of research. Cultural neuroscience investigates the relationship between culture and the brain, particularly the ways in which culture both constructs and is constructed by the mind and its underlying brain pathways. So, exactly how might culture wire our brains? According to findings from cultural neuroscience, the mechanism has to do with the brain's plasticity, or our brain's ability to adapt to long lasting engagement in scripted behaviors. The capacity of our brains to undergo structural changes from recurrent daily tasks has been well documented in our hippocampus, which is up here near our prefrontal cortex. One of the widely studied traits of interpret cross-cultural differences in behavior, cognition, and emotion is self-control. Self-control refers to how we perceive and understand ourselves. Western cultures promote an independent self-control where the self is viewed as a separate, autonomous entity, and the emphasis is on the self's independence and cultural uniqueness. East Asian cultures, on the other hand, foster an interdependent self-control. With that, it means that the self is more relational and harmonious to the interconnection with others. So here in Western society, we're about self. What is self? How does self relate to self and the things that self touches? In our Eastern cultures, it's about how myself relates and interconnects to everyone else. So in doing our research and finding our family tree, we're going to do what they do. We're going to look at ourselves as constructs interconnected with other constructs. We are not this lone entity and being that we walk around with and perceive to be. So using that together, we're going to use this neural blueprint to create the foundation of ourselves, to create the foundations of our cultures. So as these researchers have suggested, our endorsement of particular cultural values may leave a greater impact on our brains than our own behaviors themselves.
Dope. You know what's dope about that? And just to, put the period, when the East is in the house, the Eastern philosophy is the better way. And, people don't think of Africa as being East, in Israel, because Jewish people are about family. They're about family. And where we come from, a lot of different African cultures are about family. Like I said, there are things that are passed down from your DNA that carries your family from generation to generation. So we are not separate. This is a Western philosophy that we have been drugged with, that we want to be about self and say stupid stuff like self-made, because no one in this world is self-made. From you having two sets of people that made you, you're not self-made. From if you're a business person, your customers that consume your products make you who you are. No one is self-made. It's the dumbest thing people say. It's the dumbest philosophy in the world. And if we are going to become a better functioning society, stop saying that stupid saying, please.
That is the best. That is the best way to end this episode, is the stop saying stupid stuff. I love that. And I almost want to, if our self-care assignment for this week wasn't so good, that could almost be this week's self-care assignment, is quit saying dumb stuff.
Word.
So if you want to say smart stuff, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And you can always email us at flywithusla@gmail.com. I'm Lady Bounce.
I'm Picket Fence.
And we out.
Peace.